let me, without further ado, introduce you to my next guest, who is called Nula Suchet. And Nula has had a fantastic career. She worked in the arts, she worked abroad. She met her husband in Africa while she was working, and then they had a happy marriage. But then, of course, that word dementia occurred. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Nula. Hello to you, Nula.
Hi, Ali. Good
Lovely.
afternoon.
Lovely to join you. Lovely to have you here and joining us for the Brace conference. Now, you have indeed written a book about what happened to you, but before we start, before we find out about this extraordinary journey, just tell us a little bit about yourself and about James and how you met.
I met James on location as a location artist for a series that he was directing in Kenya with Walter Cronkite. And in the 3 weeks of shooting the film, I got to know this lovely, lovely man who was just lovely. And we had a lot in common. We both came from Ireland. We'd both been married to medics, and we both lived in England. England was our home. And when we returned to England after the shoot, James invited me to dinner, and within a year we got married. So it was a very much a very romantic meeting and a happy ending.
Absolutely fantastic, true love. And you were married for a wonderful 20 years, weren't you?
Well, 25 years in all, actually,
yeah.
Ali. But
20 years of James being James.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as I mentioned, tragedy struck in that way, because he was only 57 when he was diagnosed, but you'd started noticing things, and friends had started noticing things.
Yeah, at the beginning, Ali, there were small things like losing his glasses. He lost a valuable watch. He left his passport on the plane. He would, leave, jackets behind in hotels. And I just, that's things that can happen to all of us. So I didn't really pay much attention to that. And then he became a bit lax about his personal hygiene, and his desk was untidy. He started not answering important telephone calls. And then we had a meeting with the producer about a script he'd written, and he was full of gung-ho going to this meeting. And when we got to the meeting, he didn't respond to the producer at all. He wasn't answering the questions. James, the producer was saying, I love the script, James, where do you see it going? There was silence. So all those little things were happening that made me realize there was something odd going on. And then strange behavior. He ran over my little Jack Russell dog, and she died as a result of it. And he had no kind of emotion, Christmas Day came, I didn't get a card. There was no acknowledgement of Christmas. So there were lots of things like that. And then we were with some friends of ours in the west of Ireland. And she had been a medic in a top New York hospital, and she noticed James was not right. Over dinner one evening, he knocked a glass of wine over when she was asking him questions about his filming years, and he made no apology about the wine. And then the next day she said, Nula, I think there's something wrong with James. I think you need to see a specialist. Then we ended up seeing, I took him to his GP, and the GP couldn't find anything wrong with him, said, I think he's just depressed. I think he's fine.
Because I think this is something that many people listening will have found, that, that you go to the GP, and perhaps through no fault of the GP's own, they don't really understand. You've come to them when you're feeling you've been living this for a while, as opposed to, I've just noticed something, and you need it taken seriously.
For a couple of years, and it was going on, and things were getting worse, and he was writing, frantically, and his writing was superb. That was the weird thing about this. While he was losing his hygiene and tidiness and clothes and all of that, his writing was superb. It was really quite strange. And he wrote 6 one-hour episodes on the life of Mozart, and he was getting that filmed. He was in fact in negotiation with film companies. And this was all going on when the dementia had actually crept into his life, into our life. So it was really, really very, very weird. And finally, we got to see a specialist in Harley Street, who asked him a few questions, said, yes, I think it's dementia. I thought, dementia, the word I'd never, no one in my family had dementia. I wasn't aware of anyone with dementia. So it was a terrible, terrible shock.
Nula, we've been talking about you and James, and you know you've had some really happy times. And we just thought, with his love of music as well, which I know you said he loved Mozart and was writing it. Can we see some pictures of you and hear a little bit of the music that
Yes.
that he loved? And they're beautiful pictures and show a lovely life together. But we've got to the point where he has actually been diagnosed. And what kind of dementia did he have?
He had Pick's disease, which is temporal lobe dementia, and he was diagnosed at the Addenbrooke Hospital in Cambridge. And um, it was just, a very, matter of fact, diagnosis. This is what James has. There is no cure. There are no drugs because he's far beyond giving him a drug at the time, which was Aricept. And we were led out into this grey corridor with no roadmap, with no support, with nothing. And it was just devastating. And the initial shock was horrendous.
You must have been so frightened.
I was just stunned. I think I was just, the shock was just, how was I going to accept that I was losing this person that I loved most in the whole world to a disease that I had no control over and couldn't do anything about to save him. It was beyond, horrendous. And the fact that, the idea of losing him and navigating the future without him was even worse. And when we arrived home, I think I cried actually for the first week. I just could not get myself together. And James was oblivious to everything. He was smiling. He had no idea of what the diagnosis had been. It was like, he'd been told it's a beautiful day. There was no emotion and no reaction. And it was just, horrendous. And I thought, after a week of crying and just, people ringing up and saying how sorry and stuff, all that went on, I just decided I had two options. The consultant had given me a little glimmer. He said, James has Pick's disease, so there will be a little window and he will know some of the stuff going on. So I held on to that. I thought, well, if he has a glimmer, then I'm going to fight this. And I'm going to carry on as normal and do everything that we did together and make his life as lovely as I possibly can while I've got him. And that's what I did. And I, took him with me when I went to work. I would pay hotel porters, large sums of money to keep an eye on him. When I went off, to meetings, we would go out to dinner. I'd get the best bottle of wine. I was doing everything. They were all last things I was doing to hold on to this lovely man that I absolutely adored. And I took him to the opera houses of Europe because he loved opera. And as the time went on, I started to lose more and more of him, of course. And, he started getting more aggressive. He was totally sort of uninhibited, by this time. And he would do awful things. In the middle of the opera, he'd stand up and go out, or he would shout out at the opera, at the stage, or he would say in a loud voice, I want to go to the toilet. So, there were lots of strange things. And he had a strange language, which he was speaking that I could kind of translate, but even that started to go. So it really was just grim times.
Well, it sounds like you did everything that you could to try and make it as good as it could, but there must have been a point when you thought, I can't do this anymore.
Well, the incontinency got worse and the aggression got worse. And I'm only 5'4" and he was 6 foot tall. So you can imagine trying to get him undressed after an accident and getting him into the shower, it was a battle. You'd be lying in bed and he would urinate in the bed, so I'd have to get up and change the sheet, and getting him out of the bed to change the sheets. It was battle, battle, battle. I lost a stone in weight. I was getting so stressed. And in the end, Maureen, his wonderful, wonderful sister, came over from Edinburgh, and she was working for Macmillan Trust over there. So she understood the disease actually quite a bit. And she said, look, you've got to think about putting James into care, because he wouldn't allow carers in. He wouldn't allow, I had friends who were coming in. I had a lovely cleaning lady that used to work with me on jobs I was on, and she would come in, and he wouldn't allow her into the house anymore. If friends came in for supper, he'd ask them to leave in the middle of the supper. So he became really, really aggressive. It wasn't the James I knew. So finally, she found this care home for him, and so I had to basically hand him over, and that was like the biggest betrayal of my life. I thought, how can I possibly hand over this wonderful person that, you know, I adore, and, you know, pack his bag? And anyway, all of that was so terribly traumatic at the time.
I can imagine. And, you know, as we've been hearing earlier this morning, you know, care is so important. It's so current at the moment in the current COVID situation, about access to homes and finding the right home and being there for people. But you yourself had difficulties. And I know your sister-in-law helped you, but it was hard, wasn't it?
It was very hard, and I wasn't able to let go of him. Even though he was in care, I ended up, I mean, I looked after him for 5 years, Ali, before he went into care. So I had all that 5 years of holding on to him. And then when he went into care, I did his room up for him. I put in things that he loved into the room that he might, you know, remember. I blew up our life in big, you know, photographs all around the room, hoping that would be a connection. But of course, it wasn't. I would go in almost every day to see him, and sometimes he wouldn't allow the staff to shower him or bath him, but he would allow me to do it. He was like a child. He would behave when I arrived, but when they were there, he wouldn't do anything for them. So he still had that little window that sort of he held on to for quite a while. But then even that started to go, you know, but the guilt of handing him over never left me. And James's mum, who was adorable, used to ring me every morning and say, look, and I would be crying down the phone, and she'd say, look, you've done the best thing, you know, he's being cared for now 24/7, you know, you've got a chance to get yourself back together again, and it's what James would want. So she was wonderfully, but it still didn't console me. I would still go in every day to check him and so on. Yeah,
so hard. Now, you've written a book about your experiences, The Longest Farewell it's called, but it's because it's sort of a real, I don't know, you and James had many things in common, and yet in this, the most difficult of times, and this, a care home, you met somebody who sort of changed your life as well. In fact, you met two people who changed your lives. And the first person you met was somebody called Bonnie, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. She had a room almost next door to James, and she would wander in and out of his room, and I would take her downstairs for a hot chocolate and James's coffee, and we'd walk back together. And she became, I got to know her really well. Sometimes I'd help to bath her when she wasn't terribly keen to have a bath. And, I would, she'd sit on James's bed, and she'd look through pictures. And so I got to know her really well, which was really quite strange. But I'd never met John. In all the times of going in and out, I'd never met John. And then one day the care home manager decided to organize a lunch because I wasn't coping very well. Every time I left the care home, I was in tears, which was, and John wasn't coping either. And we were younger spouses. They weren't parents, they were our spouses. So it was a difficult situation. And I didn't know anyone, Ali, that had a spouse in my, situation. So there was no one to talk to. There was no care support. I didn't know where to go at the time. I was completely in an alien sort of place. I had no contacts, I had no help. I would ring the Edinburgh hospital every now and again and cry on the phone and say, is there anyone who I can talk to? And they would say, well, actually, no, we don't know anyone. We can't put you in touch with anyone. And, a prof is away at the moment on a sabbatical. So it was all doom and gloom. Anyway, we had this lunch, and John arrived, and
this, of course, is, if I just explain, although I think your surname gives it away, John Suchet, yes, a broadcaster, of course, who himself was the husband of Bonnie.
Yeah, and they'd had exactly the same relationship that James and I had. She was the love of his life, and he was absolutely broken. And he started talking across the table, and suddenly the words he uttered were exactly what I was feeling. And I sort of paid attention and I listened, and, you know, and anyway, but I didn't particularly see him. I just saw the person that was uttering the same language that I was going through. And then we agreed to email each other, or he asked for my email, and we emailed each other for about a year. You know, how are you? How are you coping? I was in the care home today. I saw James. I took James. You know, I was with Bonnie. This went on for about a year. And then he invited me out for a meal, and it wasn't terribly, you know, successful, because he spent the whole meal telling me he wasn't looking for anyone. And I thought, well, bloody hell, I'm not, you know, it was a very strange time. And it was like we were doing this dance of trying to share a journey, and yet our two people that we love most in the world were still here, and, you know, we were going to visit them and so on. So it was a very weird time, Ali.
It must have been an extraordinarily weird time, and, you know, comforting for both of you that, you know, you weren't alone in this nightmare.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but as you say, you weren't looking for love, nor was he, because you both had your loves.
Right.
One of the things that you said when we've chatted earlier before we came on was that there were 4 of you eventually in the marriage, and still are in a way.
There were 4 of us, and it stayed like that, and it still is the same. We'll even now we'll say, oh, do you remember, you know, John will say, oh, you know, Bonnie and I did that, or, you know, we went there, and I do the same. But it's lovely to be able to do that, because we have they were our past, and they're still in with us, and we still talk about them, and I think they always will be with us. You know, we have things that they owned, like bits of art and bits of belongings that they loved, and we hold on to those because that's what they love. So it's quite a strange relationship, really, and that we managed to survive it, because many times, Ali, it nearly broke us, because it was such a harrowing journey with you know, dementia. And I know people are talking much more now, and there's a lot more help out there, and
Yeah.
so it's important to, you know, to have that.
What I wonder is, because human beings are strange creatures, aren't they? They can be so cruel at the toughest times. Was there
Yeah.
any sense that inexplicably you had found John in the same scenario, going through the same thing, but you sort of found, you know, a support and attraction together, and eventually obviously ended up getting married? Was there anyone who was saying, oh, it's a bit soon, or gosh, no, you
No.
know?
You know, Ali, it was really weird, because at the beginning, you know, that the care home were emphasizing around this lunch table, you know, 6 years into dementia, that these lovely people that we love so much are never going to be able to respond to you again. I mean, there was no response from James and Bonnie. They didn't know us anymore. When we would go to visit them, they could walk down the corridor away from us, and you'd go after them and put your arm, but they didn't know us. You couldn't hug them and say you loved them. You couldn't get any response back from them. So in a way, we had lost them a long time ago. So everybody around us, like the care home manager and the carers, were saying, you must make a life. My friends, my family were saying, Nula, you must get on with life. James is gone. He's never going to come back. You're never going to have that James again. And unlike cancer, where, you know, I know cancer is awful. You know, we have someone in our family going through it at the moment, and it's horrendous. But we can talk to them. We can hug them. We can tell them we love them. And you have them. With dementia, they're gone. And you don't have them. You can put your arms around them, but there's no response. And with James and, you know, Bonnie, that was the case. They didn't know us. And I think in a way, you know, John and I realized that then. And not one person has ever said to us, oh, you know, that was, because it happened so gradually, Ali. You know, we didn't just meet and say, oh, I'm in love. It wasn't anything like that. It was quite a turbulent journey in a way, because the guilt was always here. For me, I was more female than John. John was offered a great job, you know, at the Classic FM, so his life continued. My life ended, if you like, because I became a full-time carer with James, and then I didn't go back into interior design or art again, because I felt quite actually, you know, broken by the whole thing, and to get back again would have been really, really, really hard. So for me, it was like, get on and make a life, and that's what I did, really. And John was there, and we sort of ended up staying together, even through the bad times we stayed together.
I must tell you, I mean, I don't know if you can see them, but there are so many messages coming in as we're talking. People just saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. It means so much, says Jan. A very brave and honest talk, Nula, says Norman. And Sally says, thank you, Nula. I'm glad you and John have found a life together. I mean, I'm so pleased. We are all so pleased that you've found each other. It's such a moving story. And it's your honesty is really, really refreshing. Tracy says, thank you for sharing your story. story. My dad started with many issues, dementia being one of them at 56, but it was many years before he was properly diagnosed. And many things you have endured were endured by my mum, and it's hard. It's never an easy story to tell. What sort of words would you say to people who are going through this at the moment?
I would really say, you know, hold on to yourself, because it is such a traumatic time. I mean, dementia is like no other diseases, as I said, with most diseases like Parkinson's, you know, cancer, you have the person. With dementia, you lose them. So the thing is, you've got to hold on to you, because you'll end up going down as well, as I nearly did. I lost a stone in weight. You know, I wasn't sleeping, you know, so dementia can get to you as well. So I think you've got to love them. Of course, you know, I mean, I love James till the very end and beyond, but you've got to kind of make a life for yourself as well, and share and get support. I mean, now I'm working for Alzheimer's UK and rare dementia, and I'm so passionate about getting dementia out there, because dementia, Ali, is still the outcast of diseases. Even Sean Connery, who died recently, we didn't know he had dementia because the family didn't tell anyone, because there's still a stigma attached to dementia. So even after all these years, James has been dead now for 6 years, there's still people who will still whisper dementia. You know, it's like, we have to shout it out and say, yes, it's here. You know, it's affecting so many people in England, and we must help each other and get the support we need and talk about it, and financially as well, because, you know, it's the only disease that you don't get financial support. If you've got cancer, you're helped till the very end. With dementia, you have to pay your own care home. It's a much harder journey with dementia. So I think everyone should just campaign for a much better, you know, recognition of the disease and support.
Both you and John, I know, are very strong, advocates of supporting any of the kind of charity work that goes on. But I'm just interested to know, you obviously found love, for which everyone is very pleased for you. But was it an easy ride? Because both of you must have been so traumatized.
No, it wasn't an easy ride, because we were older as well by then. We weren't teenagers. You know, we'd had a wonderful, wonderful, you know, marriage with James and Bonnie. And then to lose that and to be on your own, sort of in your 50s, going into your 60s, was a really strange time. So you were sort of, you know, your character is formed by then. You know, you're not going to change for the other person. So John and I had quite a few sort of differences, you know, that I would challenge him maybe a bit more than, you know, perhaps, you know, Bonnie would, because she'd been with him for 30 years. So, and he would challenge me in the way that, you know, James wouldn't, because I'd been with James for 25 years. So, you know, we had lots of that sort of thing. But the one thing that we do have in common is music. He loves Beethoven. So in a way, and he's starting to remind me of James a bit more as he gets older, because I can see lots of things in him that is quite similar. So maybe fate, you know, did sort of work overtime and, you know, actually brought us together, because it's really quite strange. We do really, really get on incredibly well now. So we've come through the hurdles, if you like, of emotion and sort of acceptance and all of that to be together. And we've kind of, we're in a much calmer place, you know, now than we were during our, you know, so-called, you know, friendship. So
the comments keep coming in, Nula. I've got here, oh, it's just whizzed up. Sorry. I feel privileged, says Julie, to be in the room and hear this live. Someone says, please, can you tell us the name of the book? Well, it's The Longest Farewell, isn't it?
it is.
Everyone here is just really enjoying hearing you talk. I saw John lurking around at the beginning of our interview. Is he still there?
With all this computer stuff, because he's much better at that than I.
And Nula, if I know we didn't go into too much detail and much more in your book, but you did have a job convincing yourself that it was dementia, in the sense that you thought it was every other thing, and then it took a while with the doctors as well. What would you say to anybody who's listening to this if they have a suspicion but don't even know how to tackle it with their loved one?
Yeah, well, I think insist on getting expert, you know, diagnosis. I mean, I took James to several GPs, and he had various problems. He would complain of pain down his legs. He would complain of, you know, he would just have strange, you know, complaints. And none of the doctors picked it up, because A, he was only in his 50s. He looked perfectly normal, and none of them picked up dementia until this American, doctor friend of ours said, I think it's, but even she didn't pick up dementia. She said it might be something to do with his brain, a bleed or a tumor or something like that. So dementia wasn't the obvious diagnosis for somebody young. It's quite a battle to get someone diagnosed at that age. If you're 80, yeah, they'll say, oh yeah, you've got dementia because it's your age. But with a younger with a younger person, it's impossible to diagnose dementia. So I think get an expert, get a neurologist, get an expert who knows about it if you have any kind of suspicion, and get a diagnosis. I think that was the beginning, and I should have had that several years before I did. And it would have made the journey much more unacceptable. Instead of that, I would get cross with James when he would do things. He would drive me crazy, and I would argue with him. And, you could be driving him somewhere and, give him a sandwich, and he'd throw the sandwich on the ground and he wouldn't eat it. And I would stop the car and just cry. He was just really badly behaved. And I just put it down to him being a director and thinking, he's
Lovely.
the BBC. Exactly. And so so really in a way, and of course you can't look back on that too much, because it's how you dealt with the situation, at the time. And he could be terribly rude to people. And as I said, when we'd have friends in for a meal, he'd come in halfway through the meal and with his watch and say, out you lot. And he wouldn't be very nice. He would actually use the F word to get them out of the room. So, this was all the things that James just wasn't James. So diagnosis, if I could get anything, is to get the disease has to be recognized and diagnosed.
Nula, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. As I say, I've been sharing just a few of the comments. People have really, really enjoyed listening to your story. It's so honest. And we're going to leave you, say goodbye, but leave you with some pictures of you, John, and Bonnie as well, and your new life. And also we can see the book as well, so people can buy it if they would like to. I'm just wishing you all the best and much, much happiness. You both so deserve it.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you
and to
so
you
much.
too. Thank you. And that was just extraordinary to talk to Nula Suchet and to hear about the story of her and James, of Bonnie and John, and the fact that they found love together. And you saw the name of the book there.